Good evening and welcome, and thank you very much for coming. My name is Nick Humphrey and I am the Chairman of the Growth Company Awards. I'm also a partner at K&L Gates, where I'm the head of the M&A team. I spent the last 3 or 4 years, as many of you probably know, researching high performance, trying to deconstruct the art and the science of success amongst executives. And I interviewed dozens and dozens and dozens of CEOs, entrepreneurs, but also elite athletes, Olympians, super coaches, Harvard professors and so on. And what I was trying to do was figure out, well, what is the secret sauce? What is it about these people that drives their high performance? What were their daily habits? What was their mindset? How do they drive clarity and focus? And I've boiled all that down to a concept of peak experience, where peak stands for passion, essentialism, autopilot off, and kinetic cycles or flow. So the first one is really passion. Everyone I interviewed, whether they were an Olympian or a New York Times best-selling novelist, they loved what they did, right? For them, it wasn't a job, it was a calling. So when I spoke to Izzy Folau, the Wallabies player, a very humble and genuine man, but I was very struck by the fact that he didn't allow himself to be distracted by money, by fame, by social media. He had this really laser-like focus on just playing to the best of his ability. So that made me want to explore, well, what are the basic motives behind why people are doing what they're doing? And you probably heard there's the internal motives or intrinsic motives, like following your passion or playing to your signature strengths or service to others. And there's the external motives or extrinsic motives, and that's money and fame and power and title. And there were all these great studies that showed that those people who followed their internal motives performed better. And one of them is this West Point study, where they've tracked the career of 10,000 graduates over their careers in the military in the US, and it showed that those that had internal motives were promoted 20% faster than their colleagues that had the external motives. So ironically, the title or the fame is less likely to come if that's your motive. So what do we do as mere mortals to drive passion? I think the first thing is to have some self-awareness about the fact that our passion may be waning, perhaps reconnect with why we're doing what we're doing. And the third component is really about job crafting, is really making your job your own and making sure you spend time following your own signature strengths. So the E was for essentialism, and essentialists really believe that less is better and that more is sacrifice. So less is better and more is sacrifice. And what that means is taking on new tasks means you have to sacrifice doing an existing task well. They also believe in the 80-20 rule, which a lot of people talk about, where 80% of your outcomes from only 20% of your inputs. So 80% of your profit comes from 20% of your clients. And it can be more acute, where 90% of your problems in staffing come from only 10% of your staff. How often are we as leaders going to tolerate people in our team who are underperformers, who aren't constructive, who aren't hardworking, who aren't energetic? And through the 2020 program, I got to have a chat with Trent Robinson, who's the head coach at Sydney Roosters. And he has this great, simple system. He traffic lights everyone. Green light, orange light, red light. Every player, every grade. And what he does is he makes sure that he's surrounded by mainly people who are green lights. They're energetic, they're team players, and they're hardworking. And he really tries to minimise the red lights. So A was the third element, and that's just autopilot off. Autopilot off just means mindfulness. So without exception, every elite performer, whether they're an Olympic rower, a Wallabies player, a super coach, they all practice some form of mindfulness. And that can be as simple as surfing or meditation or Pilates or whatever it was. They were highly attuned to what mindfulness was. And it's really about being present and aware and in the moment. So not worrying about the fight you had yesterday with a customer, or not worrying about whether you're going to get the promotion tomorrow. It's about being in the moment and immersing yourself in that task. A subtle part of mindfulness is really leaving your preconceptions at the door. And there was a great study they did in the 1970s. They found that only 6% of people in an orchestra were women. And they were trying to figure out why that was. So they started to do these blind auditions where they put up a curtain and the player would be behind it. And that way the conductor could only hear the music that was being played and forget about their unconscious bias. And they actually made the women take off their high heels so they couldn't hear their shoes, and take off their perfume. So the conductor just focused on the music that was being played. So the great news is that us as mere mortals, we can practice mindfulness. We can do gardening, we can do surfing, anything that gets us in the moment. And I found that after only 8 weeks of meditating for 10 minutes a day, you're actually able to strengthen your empathy, your intuition, your self-awareness. You can actually strengthen the neuroplasticity between your lizard brain or amygdala and your prefrontal cortex, which is great news because it's like a muscle, you can build it. The last part is K, which is kinetic, which is about cycles, it's about flow. And all these elite athletes and top CEOs were able to find times when they could really have hyper-focus. It's about doing tasks that are risky, challenging for you, they're really important, and you get in the zone, you have no interruptions. And in that peak state, what you have is enormous productivity. So some of these novelists, for example, could produce 500% more in this peak state than they could on a normal day. So in other words, in one day of writing, they could do what their normal self would take a whole week of. They also found that you were more creative. In other words, the super you in flow is 6 or 7 times more likely to solve a problem that the normal you can't solve. One of the other benefits of flow is really the neurochemicals it releases. The body loves the fact that you're so focused. It likes the fact that you're doing stuff you love and is important to you, so it rewards you with neurochemicals. This great cocktail of endorphins, dopamine, serotonin, the 3 best neurochemicals that are really going to get you focused. An important element of this flow state, and athletes really get it right because they run a marathon, they need to take a break. They play a World Cup game, they have a few weeks off training. But we as executives, we're terrible at it. The first thing that we do when we get busy and stressed is we work harder and we forget about balance, we forget about recharging, we forget about quality time with our families. One interesting new theory on recharging or resetting your brain is called sensory modulation. And the basic idea here is that you appeal to your basic senses, so whether it's touch or taste and so on. And there are 2 extra senses, proprioception and vestibular movement, which basically means moving through space like on a bicycle or doing weights. And there was some research done around teen suicide, and they found that boys stopped doing those activities when they were 11, 12, 13 because it wasn't cool anymore. They were playing on PlayStation or whatever they were doing. But by returning to those basic movements of jumping on a trampoline or riding a bike, the brain released great reset chemicals that allow them to deal with their stress. So in summary, what all these people were doing was focusing on 3 peak experiences: mindfulness, sensory modulation, and cognitive flow, right? And the great thing was that each of these different types of mindsets have a halo. So if you meditate in the morning, you'll have 3 or 4 hours of calmness after that. If you practice sensory modulation, going to the gym or boxing, you'll have 3 or 4 hours of great growth hormones and energizing hormones in you. And if you practice flow, it can actually have a halo effect of like 2 or 3 days. So in conclusion, I'd just like to thank everyone for coming. I'm going to look forward to the awards. I wanted to thank Renee DeVito, who's my executive assistant and also project managed this program for an entire year, which is a huge job. So thank you very much, and back to Tony.